Do you want to learn how a professional software engineer sets up a Windows machine for the best development experience? I'm going to show you how to use WSL, a built-in Windows feature, to get a fully functional Linux development environment on your computer. If you're doing any kind of web development, whether it's front-end or back-end, and you're on a Windows machine, I got you covered. Let me show you how it's done. All right, first let's talk about requirements. In order for this to work, your computer has to support virtualization and it has to be enabled. To check that, you're going to open up the task manager. In order to open that, you'll hit Control-Shift-Escape. That's a shortcut key in Windows. And from there, you're going to go to the Performance tab. And inside of there, click on the CPU view. If you go down to the lower right, you'll see it has virtualization and it should say enabled. If it doesn't say enabled, that means one of two things. One, your computer won't ever support it, in which case, sorry, you're kind of out of luck. Or two, your computer would support it, but you have to enable it in your BIOS. Unfortunately, I don't know what computer you're running, so you're going to have to figure this out on your own, but you can try booting into your computer's BIOS and look for settings that have anything to do with virtualization or Hyper-V or anything like that. It's going to be in your chipset settings. So if you can look in there, and if you find out that you do have virtualization and it's not enabled, enable it, and go ahead and reboot and see if that's turned on in your settings then. So anyway, I'm assuming you actually do have virtualization, and we're going to continue on. So the next step is to actually go ahead and install WSL. So the way we're going to do that is you're going to open up PowerShell. So go ahead into the start menu and type in PowerShell and enter. Once PowerShell is loaded, type in WSL space -- install. If you don't have WSL already installed, it'll go through the process of installing WSL, making sure that all the required components are there, making sure you have virtualization enabled, etc. And it'll probably require a reboot, just FYI, so be prepared for that. But if you do already have WSL installed like I do, it'll just tell you on the screen that you already have it installed. So for my computer, there's no more steps to take. If for yours, you might have to pause it here until your computer finishes installing WSL, and then you can come back and resume. So assuming WSL is now installed, the next step is to set up your initial username and password. This is different from your Windows username and password. It can be whatever you want it to be. Just make sure you remember what your password actually is, because that's going to be how you access any of the root commands on WSL. And that's very important for like updating the operating system, installing new software, pretty much anything that requires escalated privileges. You need to know this password, and it's not the same as your Windows password. So since I already have WSL installed, I'm going to go ahead and install a new distribution on there as a new instance. This way I can show you guys from scratch what it looks like. All right, so now it's installed. All right, one last step for WSL. If you already had WSL installed before you started, let's just double check that you're running version 2 for the distro that you want to use here. So just run this command here, WSL -- verbose, and that'll tell you the distros you have installed and what version of WSL is running with that distro. You want to make sure they're on 2. 1 is very outdated and is not going to work as well with our situation here. So anyway, assuming that WSL is all set up correctly, let's move on to the next step. And that next step is using Windows Terminal. Now, this isn't a requirement. This is just something that's a nice quality of life improvement here. Windows 11 should have this automatically installed by default. Older versions of Windows, you had to actually manually install it. But this Windows Terminal has been around for a while now, and it's fantastic. It's a huge upgrade to the command line prompt or just the basic PowerShell window that you run from Windows. So I highly recommend using it. And now that you've installed WSL or maybe a new distro, when you fire up Terminal again, brand new, it's going to automatically have that WSL distribution listed in the dropdown from items you can launch. You can even go in the settings and tell it what you automatically want to run. Like I never really go into PowerShell very often. I'm always launching Terminal to run Ubuntu or to run WSL. So I've actually told it to use my WSL instance by default when I fire up the terminal. So it's just nice to go in there and play with your settings. You can also change colors and fonts and make it your own, make it look good. So anyway, now we're in the terminal. So go ahead and switch over to WSL. So you're running WSL in the terminal. And let's go ahead and update the operating system that you just installed, update Ubuntu to make sure that it's the most current version. Chances are you're running a very out-of-date version of the operating system, but with a few quick commands, a little bit of time while it downloads and installs, you're going to get up to date to the most current version. So what we're going to do is we're going to use sudo, which is telling the Linux to run an escalated command, run as root, and we're going to tell it to first, we're going to update its list of packages. So sudo apt update, let that run for a bit. You might have to enter your password. You will have to enter your password. And that's the password you set up before. That's why I told you you have to remember your password, because this is where you have to enter it in. You won't be able to update otherwise. So go ahead and enter your password, let the list of packages update, and then once that's done, run sudo apt upgrade, and that will actually install all the latest packages for your operating system. This will take a few minutes, so go ahead and let it run, pause it while it's running, and then unpause it once it's ready to go again. All right, so now we're up to date. This should already have most of the packages you need for just a base development environment. You're going to have like Git, you're going to have SSH, you're going to have curl, you're going to have all the CA certificates you need to be able to connect to things. So we're not going to right now add anything new using the package manager apt. Instead, what we want to add is some version managers for specific programming languages. And this is going to vary based on what you actually need to use, but I want to show you the three most common ones that I use on a regular basis. The first one is the one I use the most, and that is NVM, and that's the Node version manager. And that's a script that someone wrote that allows you to download individual and switch between individual versions of Node.js without having to go and actually download and manually install these packages one by one. It makes it very easy to just very quickly hop between versions. So if you're running in like an old code base that's running like something super obsolete like Node 16, you can just type a quick command and now you're running Node 16. And then when you go back to a long-term service version like Node 22, which is current, you can just hop on over to that just by typing another command, and you're back on Node 22. So here we're going to use, you can Google NVM install, find the installation folder, the installation command. I'm going to paste that into my terminal here and let it run. It's going to very quickly install. And then I'm going to copy and paste the thing at the end here so I don't have to reload my terminal. And now I can actually directly manage the versions of Node that are installed in this WSL instance. I'm going to go ahead and install 22 to show you how it works. So I'm going to do nvm install 22. And once that's done, I can show you that when I type in Node and the -v to tell me what version is running in verbose mode, that we're running the version I expect, version 22. We're going to do a very similar thing for Java. For Java, there's a couple different version managers out there. I like SDKman. That will also allow you to do other JVM type packages. I've only really used it for Java, but it's great for Java. So go to the SDK website and find its installation. It's going to be very similar. You type a command and wait for it to run. So I'm going to paste that into my terminal here. And then once that's done, I'm going to go and look on their website for what the current version of 21 Eclipse Tamarin is. That's the version of Java. I'm going to paste that into here to install that version. And now you can see once that's done that I just type in java-version and that will just run and tell me what version is running. And then as we expect, it's version 21 running Eclipse Tamarin. Again, we're good to go. If we ever need other versions, it's very easy to just install a new one and to switch to them. The instructions are on the website. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but it's just very useful to have and to know. Finally, the one I use the least, but which is still good to know, is the PyEnv, which is the same concept, but for Python. The main difference here is that with Node and the NVM and the SDKman, those are actually downloading pre-built binaries. You're actually downloading the Node.js version that's released by the Node.js Foundation or whatever the releasing company is. Same with Java. Whenever you pick a particular SDK to download, it's prepackaged, it's zipped up, and it just comes straight to you. With PyEnv, you have to build the entire Python instance from scratch. You're downloading the source code, running it through all the compiler steps, and then spitting it out. So it's going to take a lot longer, and even before you can run PyEnv, you have to install some dependencies. So first I'm going to go ahead and install PyEnv. You don't need any dependencies to install it. You just need it to actually run it. So now that it's installed and I next need to edit my profile to include its settings. They don't automatically do that like SDKman and Node do. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and try running pyenv to install the latest Python 3 version. And you'll see it immediately fails. And that's because none of the build tools that are needed to build Python are installed on my system. So if you go to the documentation of pyenv, it tells you what you need to install. I'm going to copy and paste that in. I'm going to add in one last library that it tells me it will need for the most current version of Python 3. And this will go ahead and download an additional 100 megabytes or so of install space or install files and install it. Wait for that to complete. And then once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and actually tell it to install Python 3. And this is going to take a little bit. So it'll take about 5 minutes on my laptop. And so let's let this run. You're not going to see much happening because it's pretty quiet while it's actually running. But trust me, it's doing something. And then eventually it'll complete. And then we can now actually run Python and see that it's running the right version. All right, the last thing that we're going to install, I'm going to show you how to install is Docker. Having Docker is an essential piece of software for development, and it's going to be super useful for you. So let's just go ahead and get that installed. Because you're running Ubuntu on here, it's actually very easy to install, and you can run it straight from Ubuntu. You could install it on Windows, and that uses the Docker desktop, but they changed their license a few years ago, where if you do use Docker desktop, there's certain restrictions. But if you install it using Docker Engine directly into Ubuntu, then that's still considered to be, free use. You don't need any type of special license. So that's why I like doing it this way. So if you go to just Google installing Docker Engine on Ubuntu, it'll have the instructions for you. So for that, we're going to copy and paste what they want you to do to add the Docker repositories to Ubuntu so it knows where to pull the packages. Then we're going to run the apt command to actually install Docker. And then once that's done, at that point now we can run Docker directly from the command line. Out of the box, you have to be root to run it. So we're going to be using sudo for it. If you don't like that, you can follow some additional instructions to change the permissions on the device files that are inside of the WSL, the Linux. And that will allow you to just run Docker straight as a regular user. I do that, but that's getting to more advanced configuration. But anyway, as you can see here, if I run the test container from Docker, the hello world container, it works right out of the gate. And you can use this same command to build your own containers, to download any images you want to off of the Docker Hub or any other type of Docker repository. And everything you can do with Docker is now available to you. So at this point, you're just about ready to have a fully functioning development environment. The last thing you need is to figure out what IDE you're going to install. And that I'm not going to get into the details of how to install a particular IDE, because that's going to vary from person to person and what IDE they're using. However, I will provide I do want to give some tips on the two most popular cases, which are VS Code, which is probably the most popular one, and the one that I use, which is the JetBrains suite. I use JetBrains simply because I've been using it for so long. I'm just so used to that environment. I'm so used to those particular shortcut keys and the windows and everything that, after using it for years and then going off and doing some freelancing, I decided, okay, I didn't like the other IDEs that were available at the time. And so I just bought a license, and I've been paying for the license ever since, just because I like it. I'm not sponsored. I'm not advocating to use it. I'm just saying that's why I use it. But they also do have community editions, which are free, which a lot of people use if you're doing Java development work. So that's why I want to cover both these cases. And the reason I want to cover them is because whether you're using VS Code or JetBrains, you actually want to approach the way you install and use the IDE very differently. If you're using VS Code, you should be installing, I highly recommend just install VS Code on your Windows machine. And the reason I say that is because even though your code's all going to be inside of WSL, and you would think that it'd be better to install VS Code inside of there, it actually works out better if you install it on your Windows machine, because then it's going to be running natively on your Windows box, and it has amazing integration with WSL, which makes sense. I mean, Microsoft wrote VS Code. Microsoft integrated Linux using WSL, so it makes sense that they figured out the best way to have VS Code running with WSL and working great. And When you actually go and install and use VS Code with a project inside of WSL, what you want to make sure you're doing is it's going to prompt you, probably, I hope, it's going to prompt you in VS Code to say, do you want to run the remote execution plugin? And you want to make sure you say yes and enable it and use it, because what that'll do is it'll install a plugin inside of WSL, inside of your running instance of WSL, that will act as a small server that is kind of like the VS Code agent inside of WSL. So all of the features you expect out of an operating system for your IDE are available to that server-side code. So this would be the same thing it would be doing if you're using a remote container, like running it maybe in a remote Docker container, or you're accessing a project through SSH. It's doing the same exact thing. This way, it treats that as if it's running locally, but through a remote protocol that allows it to know everything about your system. It's going to know when files change. It's going to know everything about the the Git status that's all right there. And you're not going to be running into limitations that you have if you were to just try to use VS Code running on your Windows machine and connect to the remote file share through the Windows network share, which then degrades what you actually have access to. You're not going to be able to get the correct permissions and file notification updates or file update notifications and everything else. Now, if you're using JetBrains, the opposite is true. You should actually install JetBrains inside of WSL, and then when you run it from within WSL as well, it'll still work as a normal UI. Is going to show up in your Windows, because it has access to a GPU nowadays. That's been around for a couple of years now, I think. You'll have to install more packages to get this to work, but there's huge advantages to running JetBrains inside of WSL versus running it inside of Windows. All the benefits I mentioned about VS Code running separately, that isn't true about JetBrains. Unfortunately, if you're running JetBrains on Windows and you're trying to access the code base that's inside of WSL instance, it's going to only be able to access that through the Windows network share. And that means it's not going to have access to all those things I just mentioned. It's not going to be able to tell when files change, or if it does notice that, it's because it's actively polling, which is going to degrade the performance of your computer pretty severely. It's not going to be able to, you're going to have problems with Git permission settings and a whole bunch of other hosts of problems. So I highly recommend installing JetBrains onto WSL and going from there. And the best way to do that specifically for JetBrains is go and find the JetBrains toolbox, install that application, and that will allow you to then just use the toolbox to install and manage any specific IDEs you want to use. So if you're using the community version of Java, or I'm sorry, of IntelliJ IDEA, which is their Java IDE, then you can install that from the toolbox. If you want to use WebStorm, which is their a JavaScript and HTML editor, you can do that from the toolbox. If you have licenses for anything else that you want to use, that's going to be all through the toolbox. And then as new versions come out, you can just click a button inside the toolbox, and that will go and update your version, as opposed to having to go and download it every time a new one comes out. Anyway, that's just my recommendation for how to do it. Just back to the file access stuff. I kind of alluded to the fact that you can access the WSL file contents directly through Windows. If you notice, that's easily accessible through your file explorer. If you go down to here, you'll see a Linux section. You can see your WSL instances all right there. Just you can navigate to any files you want to. Similarly, if you're inside of your WSL instance, your Windows drives are going to be mounted under the /mnt folder. So in my case, /mnt/c is going to be where I can access all the Windows files. So it's still very easy to swap files back and forth between file systems. It's just that in both cases, it's not treated as a local file system. Windows is treating the WSL files as a remote share, and on the Ubuntu mount, it's treating that, actually, I'm not sure. I think it's probably as like a NTFS mount, which it is, it's not going to be like a local Linux mount. It's still considered a separate mount, which it is. It's a separate hard drive. So anyway, just good to know that you can access the files from both systems. They're not self-contained, but they are still treated as separately accessed file systems. Okay, so that's it. You now have your dev environment fully up and running. You can use Git to pull down your packages. You can then launch VS Code or IntelliJ or your IDE of choice and start editing. And you can use Docker to run containers. You can run your Node or Java or Python or whatever you want to directly from your WSL instance, and you can then access that from your Windows computer on localhost. Everything's available to you. So go ahead and start playing with it. Hopefully this was useful and got you up and running quickly. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask me in the comments. I'm happy to help out with any answers. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.